Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and welcome to Mercy Unbound, a series that aims to provide hope, an avenue for healing, and one that will help you understand and then live the great mercy of God. With me today, I have a special guest, Abby Johnson. She was a former Planned Parenthood executive. Through her journey, she had several eye-opening experiences, and today we want her to share her story. She has an incredible book, Unplanned, available at Amazon. And just this last weekend, I watched a movie, Unplanned, very gripping and touching, and an amazing story. It also just hit my heart because one sees the mercy of God. He hates the sin, but he loves the sinner. And your story is so powerful, Abby. In college, you volunteered as a Planned Parenthood worker and thought you were doing the right thing. And I see that today with our society in general. You know, sometimes I wonder 100 years from now what people will look back on this generation. But when you began to work for Planned Parenthood, your intentions were good. Can you share some of those with us? And then also, there were conflicts in your family as a result of those early decisions, weren't there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what you said is so true. There's so much, I guess, misguided compassion in our society today. I mean, a lot of people identify as pro-choice because they feel like they're helping women, right? They don't want to take away a choice for a woman because they feel like that would be hurting her. It's the same with, I see it even more so actually in the LGBT community, with a lot of misguided compassion. Well, don't we want people to love who they want to love, and so there's so much of it in our society today, and not wanting to understand that love is truth and truth is love, right? And so I grew up knowing that. I grew up knowing that abortion was wrong. I grew up knowing that truth, but the further that I think you get away from the Lord, truth becomes fiction, and the truth gets muddled. And it was Planned Parenthood was presented to me as a compassionate place. Abortion was presented to me as a compassionate necessity, sort of like a necessary evil. And so I thought, well, and it was said to me, well, if women are going to be doing it anyway, don't we want women to be doing it safely? And I think because, I mean, yes, I'd grown up pro-life, but and this is really a lesson to parents, and this is what I tell parents all the time. I had grown up pro-life, but we didn't talk about abortion. We didn't sit around and talk about what it was to be pro-life or pro-choice. We didn't have those hard conversations. And so when I was actually confronted with the issue, I didn't know what to say. The talking points sounded good. And so I tell parents today, you've got to have those hard conversations with your kids, because even more so now, I mean, I'm talking about this was 97. Okay. I mean, it was like, back in the 90s, in the early 2000s, nowadays it's so in their face. These kids are confronted with this, in the early years of their childhood. you've got to have these difficult conversations with your kids, because if you aren't, the world will. And chances are the world is going to tell your kids something that you would not want them to hear.
As you kind of worked up the ladder in the Planned Parenthood, in the movie, one day the executive called you in and wanted you to kind of assume more of a leadership role, but she wanted to show you the POC, I think it was called,
Yeah.
products of conception. But yet in other parts of the movie, the staff there were using that POC meant pieces of children.
Yeah.
What was your reaction when you saw that little baby?
You would think that it would be sort of horror, I guess. But it wasn't. I think by that time I was already so in it, I'd already had 2 abortions myself. I was so far down into that evil, that sort of lifestyle. I wasn't shocked. I remember actually, this is sort of this just sort of shows the sickness, I guess. But I remember looking at this baby. It was a 12-week baby. I'll never forget it. But I remember looking at this baby in the dish and thinking, I said it out loud, actually. I said, I can't believe I said it, but I said, it's truly a miracle, isn't it, that we go from that to this? The disconnect that you live in is something that it's even hard for me to understand now that I'm outside of it, right. That I'm on this side of it. But when you're in it, people are like, how did you not see it? That's the question I get all the time. And I'm like, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know. But sin literally just blinds you to what's right in front of you.
When you think of the Lord as the great teacher, one of my favorite sayings is, when the student is ready, the teacher can teach. Mm-hmm. And you weren't there. You weren't ready,
Right.
And even you were so engrossed in all this pack of nonsense and lies. In the movie, there was an episode that hit me. A father came in with his teenage daughter and she nearly bled out.
Yeah.
Can you share that story? And what did you tell the father? Because he's out there waiting for several hours in the waiting room.
Yeah, this was a family that I knew, actually. And I could tell that she did not want to have the abortion. But the longer that I was there, I can really say I did truly become pro-abortion. I really did believe that most women who were coming in did need to have an abortion. I did feel like if you were a young person, if you were a teenager, you shouldn't have your baby. If you were single, didn't have help from the dad, you should have an abortion. If, you were in college trying to finish your education, you should have an abortion. I did really become that person who was like, most women who are walking in here shouldn't have their babies. You do just become that hardened. Your heart just becomes that hardened. You're no longer tender-hearted. And because you're separated from the Lord. Love and the Lord brings about that softness of heart. And I was totally, separated from him. So she came in, she was a teenager and sort of living this wild lifestyle. And I just thought, oh man, Like, no way, you need to have a baby, and I could tell she was hesitant. And so I really talked her into having an abortion. She did not want to. Her dad was like, you've got to talk her into doing this. She cannot have a baby. And so I said, absolutely, I will. I convinced her to have the abortion, and the doctor perforated her uterus. She began to hemorrhage. She was bleeding profusely. She absolutely should have been transferred to a hospital. It was definitely an emergency situation, but at Planned Parenthood, we didn't call an ambulance because you don't want to attract that sort of attention to the clinic. There's protesters outside. They'll take pictures. They'll pull the 911 call. That's public record. And you don't want to admit that there are risks with abortion. And so we let her just lay there on the table, continued to pack gauze inside of her, continued to give her medication, blood clotting agents. She was white as a ghost. Her blood pressure tanked. It was a very emergent situation. We just continued to pump her full of sedation, well past the limit that her body could handle. And she, I told her dad, oh, everything's fine. I lied to her dad, lied to her after she woke up. It was a very sad. It was a very tragic situation. And, one that I was told, you go out there and you lie to her dad. You go out there and you tell her dad that everything is fine, that his daughter is fine, that, we're just backed up with patients and that she'll be out soon. And I mean, she could have died that day.
You mentioned you kind of talked her into an abortion. You were very good at what you did.
And, I was, yeah. I was so good. I won their Employee of the Year award. Yeah,
exactly. And at that meeting, didn't the executive director talk about their goals and more plans and more generate the income and this and that? And it's really a big machine, isn't it?
It is. It's a big machine. And abortion's at the top. I mean, that's how they make a huge amount of their income, because abortion is their highest revenue generating, lowest cost product. So it makes the most money, but costs the least. So for them. So, I was given a quota, certain number of, I knew I had a quota, but then I was instructed to double the quota. I'd never really thought much about the quota. But all of a sudden there was this insistence on meeting the quota. And now all of a sudden we're doubling the quota. And that was a time where I just thought, what are we doing here? We'd had a quota. I'd never had a problem meeting it. So I guess I never really thought anything about it. It just had never come up before. But then all of a sudden it was like they had increased our quota a little bit. And then all of a sudden they're doubling our quota. And then it's like this push. You have got to sell. You're selling abortion. Every woman that comes in for a pregnancy test, if it's positive, you better flip her for an abortion. And people say, how do you do that? Well, it's pretty easy. You get a woman in, she's scared, she's vulnerable, she's single, she's in school, whatever it is. And our job, even if she wanted to carry her baby, even if she wanted to carry that pregnancy to term, our goal then became to wreck her plans. So, don't you know how expensive daycare is? Gosh, how are you going to do this? Are you going to work and have a baby? What's your daycare going to be like? Who's going to take care of your kid? How are you going to work and have it? That it became then our job
Right.
to wreck her intentions of having a baby, to convince her to have an abortion. And when a woman is so vulnerable, it's really not that hard to do.
Eventually, you delivered your first live baby, Grace, in the movie. I believe that's her name.
Yes.
And it was very touching. Another touching episode was when your mother, they were so happy for you, you're keeping the baby. And then you talked it, like she's in your arms, and then you say things like, "Oh, I can't wait to get back to work and continue the abortion." And your mother made a comment, something to the effect of, "Oh, I thought Grace would change things and help you kind of see the light," but you weren't there yet, even after all those other episodes, were you?
I wasn't. And, it was funny. Even the people that were out in front of my clinic, the sidewalk counselors, I remember being really, really big pregnant, sort of like, waddling into work. And I remember talking to one of them one time, and they said, how do you reconcile this? How do you reconcile working here, helping women abort their babies, and you're like 9 months pregnant, And I remember saying to them, well, it's easy. I've been pregnant 3 times, and I've made 3 different choices. Twice, I've made a choice to abort my children, not have my children. And once, I've made a choice to parent my child. It's just that simple. I mean, for me, in my mind, it was just that simple.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a pregnancy was just something to be taken that lightly. It was just that easy to throw away. And I think that even extended into my motherhood. Even, I mean, I can admit that today. I mean, even after Grace was first born, I mean, I was still working, 70 hours a week, even when she was in her infancy, because being a mother wasn't a priority.
Right.
To me. It wasn't valued at my work. Being a mother wasn't valued at my work, and it wasn't valued in my heart. And so I don't really think that I came to even really value my motherhood until I really left Planned Parenthood.
Yeah. Now, was there one episode that broke you? Was it the episode where you had to participate? And if that's, share with the audience, that episode where you actually were called in and saw what was going on in a greater detail.
Yeah, that was it. That was the moment that really changed my life. And it was, it was just I mean, like you said, you have to have, eyes to see. And I think there were a lot of little things that had sort of built up to that moment. But, and it's sort of broken down that callus that had formed around my heart. But that was the moment that I finally had eyes to see. And, seeing that 13-week-old baby fight and struggle for his life, I was finally ready to see the humanity of the child in the womb. And it wasn't his death. It wasn't seeing the death of the baby that changed my life, because I had seen the POC, right? I had seen the aftermath of abortion. It was seeing his life. it was seeing that fight for life. That was really what pierced my heart. And that was when I said, I cannot do this anymore.
Yeah. Because I remember in the movie, the infant's trying to get away from the probe, and then all of a sudden,
yeah,
gone. And another part that touched me in the movie was when the African-American grandma and had her granddaughter there, and the daughter's trying to walk in, just ignored her and was content and decided she was going to have the abortion, and they're crying and praying, and you could tell their hearts were breaking. And they said, we'll help raise the child, don't go in there. And off she went.
Yeah. I remember that being, just a very, that was in my last year there too. Yeah, I just remember thinking, you have these family members, you already have a daughter, you have these family members, and she brought her daughter in to have an abortion. But I just remember thinking, you have all of this support. You have these family members saying, we will help you, and just hearing them beg her. I just remember thinking, this is different for them. This, pregnancy is not casual for them. It means something to them. This baby that she's carrying really means something to them. And that was a very thought-provoking moment for me in that last year.
The protesters were always out the facility, and it was cute a few times you all turned the sprinkler heads on and got them all wet, and but one day you had a conversation which really hit me too, because I've read on this about, I don't know, you had thrown out like the Holocaust and slavery and all this, and how liberating abortion was and supporting women's rights. But the guy came back and said, no, this is in the same mold of dehumanizing human beings, and millions were killed because they were nothing but not a human, and I look at today almost as if back in slavery days, the slaves were just a piece of property. And I kind of analogous to, well, this is my body and I don't care what's in there. I have the right to kill it because it's mine and it's property. And I wonder what society will look on 100 years from now on ours and think on this. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because, you can say that to someone who's pro-choice and they become very offended by it. If you compare, abortion to slavery, again, it's just that disconnect. They just can't see it. They cannot see, how it's so similar. They can't see, the commodification of this human person and how it is so similar in the womb as it was to slavery. It's just, there's just a real disconnect. And even if you compare it to the Jewish Holocaust, it's so similar. But if you mention it to them, they just fly off the handle. They can't even, think of it. Their brain can't process it. Because to them, they've dehumanized the child in the womb to such a degree that they really don't see the unborn child as a person with any rights. So it's like comparing apples to oranges to them.
Many years ago, one of our kids was doing a field trip to Washington, D.C., and we visited the Holocaust Museum. And I'm not saying this is a Jewish position on abortion by any stretch, but, you're watching all these movies and these terrible things and millions killed. And I asked the gal at the desk, I said, well, what are your thoughts on abortion? And she said, well, it's a personal decision between the woman, and if she talks to her rabbi, it's a personal thing, and it's okay. And I'm thinking, gosh, after they tried to decimate your society,
Mhm. Yeah.
how could you look on that way? And that always hit me. I do want to ask one other question. I've never asked anyone with your experience and knowledge and in the pro-life movement like this, but I've always wondered, what are your thoughts on the protesters? I always thought, they should be more loving and kind. And if we're going to change these women's hearts, we do it with compassion. And I always kind of shudder when I see, people yelling and screaming at the abortion clinics. How would you respond to that?
Well, I mean, I think, definitely, I mean, we want to be approachable, right, to the women who are going in. So, if we are saying, if we're yelling at her and screaming at her, that's not someone who I want to approach if I'm in a time of crisis, right? So, we definitely need to be approachable. We need to be kind. We don't need to worry about sharing truth. I mean, we need to share truth with the women going in. But we can do that in a way that's charitable, and I think that's what always works. And we know that's what's effective. We've been doing sidewalk outreach for many years now. We know what's effective. We know what's not effective. And what's not effective is yelling at women, screaming at them, telling them they're going to hell, things like that. That is never effective.
I'm just thinking of a quote. St. Edith Stein talked about, speak always in truth, but do it in love. And it's just, Abby, what are you doing these days? I saw you some time ago testifying before Congress. And what's keeping you busy these days? What are you working on?
Well, I have two nonprofits that I run. One is called And Then There Were None. And that is a ministry that helps abortion clinic workers leave the abortion industry and helps them find hope and healing in Christ. And then I have another ministry that is called Pro Love Ministries, and we have several different projects under that. The one that most people know about is Love Line, and it's a 24-hour crisis line, and we provide case management for women who are in crisis, whether they're in crisis pregnancies, single moms, domestic violence, whatever it may be. We provide help for people in crisis.
Wow. So the work continues. And, years ago, Father Frank Pavone and I wrote a little book called Rachel Weep No More, How Divine Mercy Heals the Effects of Abortion. And women really are affected by abortion, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are very deep, and men too.
Yep.
I mean, we're learning more and more about how deeply men are affected by abortion.
All the ripple effects. In fact, a good friend of mine a few years ago confided in me that his parents finally told him that they had aborted his brother. And he was he knew something was wrong all these years, and just it was like he was carrying something, but he didn't know what it was.
Right.
And well, it's great to speak with you today on Mercy Unbound. I hope more eyes will be opened, and hearts will be converted. But it's the Lord that changes the hearts, the Holy Spirit. And in spite of how many sins we commit, God's mercy is greater. The Lord told Faustina that his mercy is unfathomable, and divine mercy of God is his greatest attribute, and he loves each one of us right where we're at. But we need to get back on track and just be an icon and reflection of this image, behind me of Jesus. And Jesus loved the little children. So,
Yes.
Abby, I want to thank you again for joining me today on Mercy Unbound. Keep up the great work. I hope our paths cross again soon, and we'll be following any new publications or movies or whatever you're up to in Congress. And just really, it's a joy to speak with you. And thank you for joining us. And people, support our work. Please subscribe to these podcasts and videos, and support Abby's ministry. And don't forget about the book Unplanned. If you don't know anything about it, it's a book worth reading. And the movie touched my heart very, very much, Unplanned. And you can get that streaming on Amazon as well. So God bless to everyone. And remember, the Lord puts before us life and death, and always choose life. Thank you so much, Abby, and God bless.
Thank you so much.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/Dr. Brian, Bryan Thatcher, Thatcher, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbrianthatcher.com.